So as pressure mounts for President Trump's administration to find a quick resolution to the war with Iran, President Trump has claimed that the US can open the Strait of Hormuz. That was the post that he wrote in the last half hour or so. Let me just recap that for you so you can see exactly what he said. Posting on his Truth Social platform, he wrote, "With a little more time, we can easily open the Hormuz Strait, take the oil and make a fortune." Clearly not one of the US stated war aims when this conflict began. And with me now, former senior officer in the British military and host of the Security Brief, Mikey Kay. Welcome back, Mikey. Donald Trump says the US could take this strait easily. Could they?
I think simple answer is absolutely not. Let's take a look at the Hormuz Strait. I mean, the geography of it is really, really interesting for starters. This is the Hormuz Strait. On the left-hand side of the screen, Anita, you've got what traffic used to be like pre-February 28th. And then you can see, so the red dots basically are the tankers on the left. You can see there's a significant amount on the left, but the actual strait itself on the right has dried up. Now, the geography is really interesting because the widest point between Keshem Island and the tip that you can see there in the bottom of the screen is 21 nautical miles. And there are two 3-kilometer channels for tankers both coming into the Persian Gulf and out of the Persian Gulf. So basically, in terms of threat, that the strait is right underneath the nose of any Iranian capability. And we can come on to that in a second. But I think what's interesting is if Trump wanted to do this, he's going to have a significant amount of US capability that is appropriate to that in order to do that. And what we've seen coming into the region over the last couple of weeks, I think we've got some footage here. I think the key capability would be the amphibious ready groups. Now, there are 2 amphibious ready groups. So the ARG on the left there, that's amphibious ready. On the right, you've got the carrier, which is the Abraham Lincoln. That's obviously a critical part to any attempt to control and get maritime superiority over the strait. But the 2 amphibious ready groups are really important. One is the USS Boxer. That's joined by 2 amphibious assault ships, so 3 in total on that ARG. The USS Boxer is interesting. It's got what's called a well deck. So the well deck basically allows Marines to go direct from ship to shore. So that's a key capability. And on the USS Boxer, there's what's called a Marine Expeditionary Unit, and that will have roughly around 2,000 Marines. Look at the second amphibious ready group, which is the USS Tripoli. We don't have a picture of the USS Tripoli up there, but it's very similar, but it doesn't have a well deck. It's called a Lightning carrier. So it's specific to air power. So there are F-35s on top of that. You've then got on the right, you've got the carrier, the Lincoln. There was the Ford, but the Ford has had to limp back to Crete. And open source intelligence indicates that will be out of action for 2 years. There is chatter about the G.W. Bush coming into theatre, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. So you've got that. You've also then got the 82nd Airborne, which are paratroopers. I think we've got some footage of the 82nd Airborne. So on the left is the 82nd Airborne. They're called the tip of the spear. They're from the Quick Reaction Brigade.
Rapid response, yeah.
Rapid response. They've got an 18-hour notice to move. So they 2,000 are already intelligence channels say coming into the region with potential for another 10,000. So that's significant. They basically wear parachutes. They can deploy through aviation, and they can drop onto any potential targets. And what's interesting about the 82nd Airborne is that if we can go back to the Strait of Hormuz graphic again, you can see that really large island in the top there, Anita. That's called Keshem Island. It's about 84 nautical miles long, and that is full of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps capability. You've then got a number of other islands. They're much smaller. I don't know if you can see on the screen, but there's around 8 to 10 other small islands, and there are 3 critical ones to the west of the Strait of Hormuz, so basically inside the Strait of Hormuz. So basically, in order for the US to do this, they would have to put boots on the ground. They'd have to soften up the targets of Keshem Island, then they'd have to put boots on the ground through all of those islands in order to secure maritime superiority.
Now, but strategically, because of the geography which you've explained, it's not a straightforward task, is it? Despite all that, hardware and personnel. Yeah,
so it's not. And if we can go back to the Strait, I know we keep coming back to this, but there's another key point on here, which is if you look at on the right hand of the screen, if you look to the north, to the top of Keshem Island, that almost looks like a shark. That is mountainous terrain that has an altitude that rises rapidly. So we've talking about the Iranian threats, which I think we've got some footage of fast attack boats, Shaheds.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me on to the next question, really. You know, what capabilities do the Iranians have to respond to any efforts to actually to reopen this strait by force? We've had, conversations, haven't we, going on here in London and elsewhere about diplomatic efforts to reopen the strait. But if the US was to follow through on this threat from President Trump, how could the Iranians respond?
Right. So the critical vulnerability of US capability that would be required in order to get anywhere near securing that strait are the amphibious ready groups. You've got 6 amphibious assault ships. They're large. And they would have to get within a certain proximity. To put them anywhere close to the Strait of Hormuz would risk strategic failure because, going back to your question, it's the unconventional sort of asymmetric threat that Iran has. If we go back to the Strait of Hormuz graphic, you start with the conventional threat, which is ballistic missiles. I already think through open source intelligence that the US has miscalculated just how much of the ballistic missile program that is attrited inside Iran. And if you go to the north of Kashim Island, that's terrain that basically has altitude on it. So it overlooks the strait. So the Iranians could put ballistic missiles on there, which could potentially target one of those amphibious ready group ships, 6 of them. That would be such risk on. It would be quite a dangerous move. In military parlance, we call it courses of action. That would be the most dangerous course of action. But then you've got the Shahed 136. I think we've got a picture of the drone here, just to show the viewers what it looks like. This is a
there we go.
There we go. Yeah, this is a low-cost, mass-produced, unconventional threat that travels at about 120 miles an hour. It's got a 20 to 60 kilogram warhead on it. Flies quite low. And the Iranians are assessed to have thousands, if not tens of thousands of these. And they're very mobile. You put them on launchers on the back of a truck and the truck goes out and you can launch them anywhere. All it takes is, in singletons, as single aircraft, that's quite an easy target to take out. But if you put 20 up there, the strategy from the Iranians will be just to overwhelm the type of air defense capability that the US has. And I think that's the problem. It goes back to those cost-benefit ratios. If the Iranians start putting up a lot of these and basically reduce the missile salvos and the ability for the US to defend against that, all it takes is for one to get through, slightly damage an amphibious ship, and then you've got strategic failure. And I think that's the risk that isn't being taken into account when Donald Trump says he can easily take the Strait of Hormuz.
OK, Mikey, thank you very much for that. Mikey Kay, host of The Security Brief. Well, as the conflict in the Middle East continues to escalate, 100 experts in international law have warned of serious violations by the US, Israel and Iran. They say the initial attack was a clear breach of the UN Charter, and they also highlight what they've called the alarming language used by US officials, including President Trump. The White House responded by saying the US campaign is making the region safer, whilst Tehran have previously said they have every legitimate right to defend themselves. Well, speaking to my colleague Anna Foster, Tom Fletcher, the UN's humanitarian chief, set out just how concerning the situation is.
Concerning is a very diplomatic way of putting that. I mean, this is infuriating. We're dealing with the intended and the unintended consequences of this reckless conflict. And I think what everyone is observing now is that war is not a television game show. It's not. Peacemaking is not a real estate deal, and the world is not a casino. And these actions have real consequences. We're out there right now. I'm in Damascus, dealing with the huge unintended consequences of this conflict.
When do you think we got to a point at which civilian lives were talked about in such a throwaway way as they seem to be now?
Yeah, I preferred the episode when we were talking about peace, to be honest. This has been a gradual and then very sudden deterioration in the way that we talk about protection of civilians, the way that we talk about international humanitarian law. This stuff isn't negotiable. You don't hit civilian infrastructure. That includes hospitals, across Beirut and across Lebanon. I met huge numbers of medics whose ambulances are being hit at the moment. You don't hit schools. You don't hit energy sources. You don't hit bridges. Those are war crimes. That is absolutely clear in international law. But somewhere along the way, we seem to have thrown that all aside, and we've chosen impunity, indifference, game show gambling over solidarity and humanity.